Hi, this is Melissa Kirk. I'm an editor and writer and book coach for self-help and wellness nonfiction books. I work with psychologists, wellness coaches, and other healers to write, publish, and market books that will spread their messages and modalities to the world. And this is the first interview I'm going to be doing in a series where I'm going to be talking to authors who publish in this genre. All about their writing and publishing journeys so that you guys can learn about how it feels to write and publish. So today I'm talking with Harmony Kwiker, Math MA, right? Mm-hmm. Harmony was a former editing client of mine, actually the first of my clients for my business when I started it in 2016. So that's awesome. It's fun to talk to you. Especially since we just realized we never actually spoke on video before. So she has gone on to not only self-publish the book we worked on together called Reveal, but to publish her second book, Align, with the publisher. And Align will be available in December. And so I thought would be really interesting to talk about the differences between these two kinds of publishing. So Harmony is a psychotherapist, author, and professor at Naropa University, where she teaches transpersonal Gestalt counseling. She's the founder of the Institute for Spiritual Alignment, where she trains therapists and coaches to bridge the divide between traditional and spiritual realms of transformation. And her first book, Reveal, did I get this? Yeah, I got it right. Reveal, Embody the True Self Beyond Trauma and Conditioning. Harmony does what most experts rarely do. She vulnerably shares her story of transformation while simultaneously empowering readers to discover their truest selves. And I can confirm that this is a super intense but fabulous book illustrating her journey, her life journey. It totally changed my way of viewing certain things in my life. So it was awesome to work on it. And her new book, Align, Living and Loving from the True Self, will be available December 2022. Who's your publisher for that again? I forget.
Mantra Books. It's under the umbrella of John Hunt Publishing.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yay. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Fabulous. I love to see your journey because I think when we first started talking, you didn't have a master's yet. You hadn't done that work. So, and then
I had gotten my master's in 2007, actually.
Oh, you did. Okay. So never mind. Yeah. My story is for sure. So anyway, so let's start. Yeah, and then you can talk about all that stuff. So what made you want to write a book? That's my first question.
Yeah. I love this question because it has me remember the first moment I realized there was a book inside of me that really wanted to come out. And I was in my early 20s. I was an undergraduate still, and I was teaching yoga, and I was spending a lot of time in meditation and self-development and working on myself because I had been in a state of a lot of suffering. And I had this opening, like my vital force just started to open and the words of the book just started to come. And when I finished my undergrad, I took 1.5 years actually to try to write this book. I worked so hard on it. I was so dedicated to it, and I would come to a screeching halt at chapter 3 every single time I sat down to write. And I was so frustrated. But nonetheless, I actually brought that little bitty manuscript. This was back in 2002. I brought that manuscript to a publisher in the Pacific Northwest because that's where I was living. And I showed it to the acquisitions editor. It was in person at that time. They were doing an event at a bookstore there. And I watched her read it. I sat there and I watched her read it. And she looked up at me and she so sweetly said, "Are you planning on going to graduate school?" And I said, "I was just wanting to write this book. I don't know what I'm doing." And she said, "I want to encourage you to go to graduate school. The world isn't ready for this book yet." I think it was really kind of her. She said, "But go to graduate school and then come back to this." And so I left that bookstore and I started applying.
Wow. That's intense.
Yeah.
So the words just started coming because you had the story needed to be told. Yeah. Yeah, it was a fabulous, it was fabulous working on it with you because I really got to know you in a lot of ways, but it was such a great journey.
So the book that my first book that you edited, I actually isn't the book that I started then. So what ended up happening was, I finished graduate school and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. I hadn't yet cultivated what I needed to cultivate to write the book. But so I took that then next manuscript, brought it to another publishing house, which is where I first met you. And you were actually the one who encouraged me to write a memoir. I was a complete no to it. I did not want to write the memoir at all.
Yeah.
And so when I got that feedback, I actually stopped writing because I didn't want to be vulnerable. Yeah. But then I was walking, it was 2 years later after that first encounter with you, and I was walking down by the creek, and all of a sudden, the first words of my memoir were in my mind, and I came home and I started writing. It came through me, and it wasn't the book that I thought I was here to write, but it was clearly the book that I needed to write first in order to finally be able to write that first book from 20 years ago.
Yeah. So my next question has to do with how and when you decided to commit to the project, but it sounds like you already answered that just now. So, it was just the time, right? It was.
I think there's like 2 levels of commitment though. So I was committed in that there was this book and I was going to find a way to write it. But there's a level of commitment that actually is scheduled time daily, putting effort in, becoming the conduit for the book, like doing my own work, which is part of the commitment to the book, embodying the message that I teach. And, with children and a business and teaching and all of that, to really commit to writing the book, a line, living and loving from the true self. Although I developed it over 20 years inside of myself, I wrote the first draft in 3 days. And so for me, and that is how I work. I know it's not how everybody works, but I just take 3 full days from like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and I just get it all out. Otherwise I don't have time to do it.
Right. Yeah. That's an interesting way to do it. I can see that working actually really well. Just taking the time and just sitting down and button seat. Yeah. So then, okay. So you were just talking about this, but so what was your writing process like? So you just told me that you sat down and you wrote it for 3 days. That's great.
I'll say, I know that some people really map out what they're going to write, and it isn't the way that I function. I'm very much like, what I do actually is I say a prayer to the muse and I invite her to come to me, and I sit in meditation and I wait and I listen. Yeah. And I wait and I listen. And once I hear her, I go to my computer and I just let it flow through me.
Nice.
And I try to not get in the way with my human sort of flaws.
That's the thinking. So then how do you shift your life? Because you have the kids, you have and then now you have the relationship. Like, do you just say like, okay, everybody, I am writing now? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it actually, I think, is a little bit stressful for my family because I am very inaccessible when I'm writing. Even if I'm in the kitchen cooking, I'm still writing. Right. It's still happening inside of me. And so they can be talking to me, but I'm not in this world with them. I'm in the writing world. So my husband takes care of the kids. My kids know I'll be back when I'm done. And, that sort of gets put on hold for that time. So sometimes I'll actually rent a hotel room just down the street from my house. So I'm still kind of, because I don't want to waste time driving somewhere. So I'll rent a Airbnb or something with a nice desk, and I'll bring all of my things with me, all of my food, and I just kind of disappear. Another part of it for me though is that I really need to stay embodied because it's such a heady experience. where a lot of energy is coming through the head, that I swim. So I like to find a place with a pool or a hot tub. I do yoga, excuse me, go for walks. And I actually keep a heater on my feet so that I have some energy coming down.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So taking a writer's retreat, just, yeah. I've done that too. It's pretty cool. So you wrote the book in 3 days. And then how did it feel to turn your manuscript over to an editor? Because I know that can be a super vulnerable moment, right?
Yeah. I mean, the first time was really hard, partly because I thought that it was my job to make the manuscript perfect. And then hand it to an editor and hand them a perfect version. And I actually find this is common with new authors. Yeah. That there's not a real understanding on the editing process and how it's actually collaborative. It can feel very isolating and like, this is my book and I'm doing it. But what I learned because you were the first person who read that manuscript, is having somebody else's eyes on what I've written illuminates everything that really doesn't fully resonate with the story in like the best way possible. It's like anything that's off center sort of gets illuminated, but then also anything that's missed because I'm so like in it, I'm not fully actually looking at the big picture. And I think the editor has that gift of like having those fresh eyes. They don't know my story. They don't know my message. That first read is so wonderful. And so for me, with the second book, knowing that, I wish I would have known it the first time, but I had so much more ease writing the second book because I knew that it didn't need to be perfect, that first draft. I just needed to get through it. It had to have some chapters that made some sense and that it was going to be a process of development. And I actually am really committed to the developing process. I like to do like 3 to 5 rounds of developmental edits because I want to just honor that process and create the fullest experience of my book as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the purposes of an editor looking at it is we don't know the story. So we're coming at it the same way your reader is going to, or they don't know you, they don't know what your message is. So if there's stuff missing or if there's stuff that doesn't really track somehow, then that's part of what our role is. Yeah. So you've both self-published and you've published with a publisher. Like what was the difference between them? How do you? What are the pros and cons? Like what was the difference between the processes? Yeah.
So for me, I thought that I wanted to publish with a publisher for my first book, but once it ended up being a memoir, I really decided this is my story. I want to own it. I want to support it. I want to stand in it fully. And I wanted, all of the creative freedom for the cover and for all of it. So I was surprised by that, actually. I never once tried to submit that book to a publisher. I knew I wanted to self-publish. And, I had a really small following of community already, because I've done a lot in the community here and elsewhere. So I knew that there were some people who wanted to read my book. And the truth is, though, Melissa, is I still have a hard time when people tell me they read Reveal. It is so vulnerable for me. Like the professional in me doesn't want anybody to know anything that I wrote in that book. And I think that is actually important because it keeps me humble. So I didn't have a strong desire for a large readership for that book, which actually helped in that capacity. But I had to, on my own, sort of like find my way of how to promote it, because I did want to promote it. I had this ambivalence with it. So what I did, this was pre-COVID, obviously, but I traveled and I went to bookstores and I led events, like little mini workshops, and it was actually really fun. But it was all on my own dime, and it was a big investment. And I'm really grateful that I chose to invest in that book, because I really believe I was investing in myself and my own story, and that like sort of taking ownership of my story in that way. With Align, I always knew I wanted a publisher, but it's interesting because the publishing world has changed so much. There's always this like sort of safety net in the background. If nobody wants to publish it, I can just self-publish it. It's kind of like always there, but like in the truth of my experience, I really wanted a publisher for Align. And so, when Mantra Books, offered me a contract, I honestly didn't know how lucky that I was. They're a really amazing publishing house that they're really committed to eco-friendly publishing practices. And they have a great community of spiritual and mindfulness writers.
Great.
And they offered me the most amazing publicist, which I actually didn't realize is rare.
It is rare.
We have a mutual friend who introduced me to you, Sue. And she's published many, many books. And I think all except for one are with publishing houses. And she told me that she wasn't offered a publicist. And so I feel so lucky.
Yeah.
My publicist works so hard for me, and he's gotten me so many interviews in front of so many people. And at this venture, I want people to read Align because I really believe that it's going to help a lot of people. And so it's about that message rather than the exposing of my story. So,
yeah. What was I going to ask? So in terms of getting the contract, how did that come to pass? Did you pitch it did you have an agent? Did you pitch it to the publishing company?
Yeah. So I've learned that in the self-help genre, you don't need an agent.
Right.
And I didn't know that, but so that's wonderful. What happened was I put a lot of effort into my book proposal. I had that edited several times too. I wanted to create the best book proposal possible. And then it ended up that I didn't need one for this publisher.
So they didn't even want a book proposal?
No, I just I had to fill out their form, which is very different from what I had created.
Oh, well, you probably, it probably helped you at least understand your book a lot. So it's probably worth it. But that's interesting because most publishers do seem like they want a proposal, but that's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because in their form, it was like their desired book proposal, but what I had created wasn't fully there. It was different. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that is really different. Okay, so you had a publicist for the second book. What about, since you've published 2 books and you've talked a little bit about marketing, how did it differ? How did marketing differ between them? Because with the first book, you had less of an audience, right? Because you were just starting out with that kind of work. So how is that different, the marketing itself?
Yeah, I feel more supported.
Yeah.
I feel like there's somebody like in my corner who also wants this book to get out in front of a lot of people. And so I'm not alone in it, which feels really great. Yeah.
No, that's great that they gave you that. I mean, but did you do, well, since you had that support, what did you do differently? It sounds like you got a lot of interviews and, what else did you do for marketing?
What I did for my first book, I'm still doing for Align. Like I still am here, like doing that same work. Like the other day I led a workshop for a community, doing a lot of online events. But the big difference is that there's more interview opportunities for me and a larger reach with those interviews.
Yeah.
And that's the main difference. It's like I'm still doing a lot of work and I have support.
Yeah. And interviews, and are the interviews with what kind of, are they podcasts? Are
they range? There's radio interviews, TV interviews, podcast interviews. There's just more opportunity.
Yeah. I think interviews are a great way to get the word out about you and your work. So that's fabulous. Congrats on that. So if you could give a new author one tip for marketing, what would it be?
Oh, for marketing?
Yeah, for marketing.
One tip for marketing, I would say, don't be afraid to give away information that is in your book, like share it freely. Obviously not the book, but like the wisdom that you have in your book, that is what's going to touch people who are going to resonate with your book. And so by offering the tools and the advice, it actually builds the relationship through your marketing, whether that's online or email newsletter or a podcast.
Yeah, I always say that marketing is about building community. So it's finding the people that you're speaking to and giving them value, and give them information, because they'll want more. The more that you give them, they'll want more. So those are all the questions I have. Do you have any, like, if you were to talk to a new author, like, give us 3 tips of what you might recommend for somebody who's just starting out?
Yeah. My first tip would be to really honor the humanity of your process. I think that it's really common to like objectify ourselves, like to produce. And I really think the humanity of the process might not fit the timeline that you have for yourself. It might look different than you think it is. And so really honor how that process is for you. I look back at my 20-year-old self and I think that she would be surprised that it took me this long to write this book. And yet I still did it. And it's the perfect time.
Right.
The second tip is, don't try to make it perfect your first go around. Let it be messy. Just get the words out. Right. Just allow the words to come and the form will reveal itself. And then the third piece would be to enjoy it. Yeah. To really let yourself enjoy writing, because that joy will come through in your words. Yeah,
definitely. And are you planning on continuing to write?
I'm editing my 3rd book right now.
Good for you.
And I'm doing a couple other projects. I'm launching my training institute and doing a lot there. Yeah.
That's great. I'm so happy that you're so successful.
Thank you so much.